As we wait and see if any other U.S. senators on that boat got infected, we're watching Republican governors across the country figure out how to negotiate this renewed public health threat. And the story of three of those governors in particular is the story of Republican politics at the moment and how deeply perverse the political incentives are in their party. So let's begin in Florida, which reported a record number of cases over the weekend, over 21,000 new cases in one day, according to data released on Saturday. Now, that's not great news, although we should say it is far less worrisome than it would have been, 6-8 months ago before many people were vaccinated. That said, the state's vaccination rate is not great. 56.3% of the eligible population is fully vaccinated. And hospitalizations also hit a record high in Florida yesterday, with more than 10,000 people hospitalized with confirmed COVID cases. Now, it's not like Republican governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, necessarily caused all this, but he has been working proactively to make it harder to deal with the virus. Back in May, you might remember, Governor DeSantis signed an executive order that banned businesses, schools, and government agencies from requiring people to prove they are vaccinated. And then, in a completely deranged move, there's no other word for it, he refused to make an exception to that rule for cruise lines. Cruise lines could not require vaccination on their cruise ships. On Friday, DeSantis signed yet another executive order, this one banning mask mandates in schools, saying parents have the right to decide if their children would wear face coverings. Of course, children can transmit as well as contract the virus, which is why you have those mask mandates. This is the new school year is about to start in person. Kids under 12-year-olds, of course, still are not eligible to be vaccinated. And we know they can spread the virus. And we know that masks do reduce transmission, particularly in indoor spaces. Through all of this, Governor DeSantis has also been behaving like a Trumpian troll, like someone who's on a message board, running a sort of shadow campaign against the evil Dr. Anthony Fauci, making jokes at his expense, even warning against the country turning into a, quote, Faucian dystopia at an event last week. An event, if I'm not mistaken, that was out of state. The governor's re-election campaign is selling T-shirts and beer koozies that say, "Don't Fauci my Florida." It's all kind of infantile. But Florida is once again going through a significant outbreak. And while Governor DeSantis did come out recently to encourage vaccination, the majority of the governor's messaging, that is when he's in the state for it, is that the tyrannical libs want to cut off your freedom. You can do whatever you want, even if that means spreading the virus around and cruise ships and filling up hospitals. But here's the thing, right? Ron DeSantis very clearly wants to run for president in 2024. That is not at all a secret. He's positioned himself to do it. So he needs to make sure that the base of the Republican Party, the folks who are going to vote in that primary, know that he is not on the side of public health and the quote-unquote bureaucrats and the people trying to suppress the virus. No, he's on the other side, the side of freedom to catch COVID and spread COVID and keep the pandemic going. Ron DeSantis has to watch his right flank as well. And he's got a challenge from the most reckless governor in the entire nation when it comes to the virus. That, of course, is Kristi Noem. She's a Republican of South Dakota. Now, Kristi Noem essentially set off a biological weapon last summer throughout the entire Midwest, not just her state, by allowing the Sturgis motorcycle rally to go on. More than 400,000 people descended on the small South Dakota city and then went back to their home states, leading to over 200,000 COVID cases, according to an estimate from one study. And Governor Noem recently bragged about not shutting down or instituting mandates throughout the pandemic. Now, South Dakota has one of the highest death rates per capita in the country. And unlike states in the Northeast that, remember, got hit before he had any really testing capacity or really knew what was going on, South Dakota was not in that first wave. South Dakota had plenty of time to prepare for its outbreak, which hit its peak last winter. But this is what Kristi Noem is running on, freedom of the grave. Her state did not shut things down. That led to more deaths per capita than, almost any other state. And that is why you should elect her president of the United States. That is why she deserves to be your leader, Republican primary voter. And those other Republicans like Ron DeSantis, well, they saved too many lives.
We talk about rewriting history. Let's talk about rewriting history. We've got Republican governors across this country pretending they didn't shut down their states, that they didn't close their beaches, that they didn't mandate masks, that they didn't issue shelter in places. Now, I'm not picking fights with Republican governors. All I'm saying is that we need leaders with grit, that their first instinct is to make the right decision, that they don't backtrack and then try to fool you into the fact that they never made the wrong decision.
I'm not picking fights with other Republican governors, but I just want you to know that I'm one of the most relentlessly pro-COVID governors in the nation. So that's what Ron DeSantis has to worry about. And we know that he knows that, right? He's a smart guy thinking about all this. Kristi Noem's message seems to be the one that animates a huge part of the Republican base, maybe the most. Now, those are two governors, DeSantis and Noem. There's another Republican governor who is just nowhere in the 2024 discussion. Has done arguably the best job of any governor in the nation, Republican or Democrat, of managing the pandemic. His name is Phil Scott. You may have never even seen a picture of the guy or even heard of him before, but he is in fact a governor. He is the governor of the state of Vermont. Now, yes, you say, Vermont is a rural state with a small population, but you know what? So is South Dakota. South Dakota is also a rural state with a small population, and as Kristi Noem has shown, none of that precludes you from really screwing up the response to the virus. Well, Phil Scott has done the opposite of Kristi Noem. He has been proactive since the beginning of the pandemic, from closing all bars and restaurants on March 16, 2020, to instituting a mask mandate last July, and crucially rolling out a very, very successful vaccination campaign earlier this year. Vermont is now the most vaccinated state in the union. 76.6% of the eligible population, 12 plus, fully vaccinated. This dispatch from Vermont describes a world where the pandemic has basically been defeated, suppressed. Restaurants, bars, shops open. Hospital COVID units are empty. The state has basically staved off an outbreak brought on by the Delta variant because they have such a high vaccination rate. They also have among the lowest death rates per capita. Now, this is a state that Joe Biden won by more than 35 points. It's a pretty liberal state. Governor Phil Scott is a Republican. But his approval ratings for his handling of the pandemic are through the roof. 71%, according to one survey released in March. Think about all this, what this adds up to. In any sane political culture, Phil Scott would obviously be a top-tier candidate for higher office. This is a guy who could walk onto the national stage and say, I managed a once-in-a-century pandemic better than any other governor in our country as a Republican in a Democratic state with a 71% approval rating. But not only is that not the case, it's literally the opposite of the case. The fact that Phil Scott managed the pandemic so well is disqualifying. The base wants the politics of Kristi Noem. They don't want Phil Scott. So just think about the incentive structure that creates. And this is bigger than Donald Trump. Donald Trump, of course, is an inescapable Republican Party, part of Republican Party politics. But in some ways, he's one of a kind, all right? I mean, if you asked me 5 years ago, who's the last person on earth, Chris, you'd want to manage a pandemic? I'd probably say, like, Donald Trump would be up there. And I would have been right. That went exactly as expected. But all this is about more than Trump's sociopathic blind spots and his insane narcissism. It's a broader truth about the culture of Republican conservative politics in this moment, what the hardcore base demands. What they demand and what their institutions push toward is actually incompatible with good governance. Good governance means you're bad politically. And that is the base for half of the politicians in this country who hold at least half of the political power, sometimes more, in many states a lot more. Their base, the right-wing media, the institutions that feed all this, they are all actively incentivizing destruction at every turn.